Hey everyone, I'm Mike. I'm an aspiring professional artist and mangaka, and welcome to my channel. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about something that you're probably doing wrong when you're trying to write your manga. Alright, let's get started. So I have some gesture drawing in the background just for, some visual interest for you. So let's get started. As a writer, it is very difficult to create a cohesive story where everything naturally flows from one plot line to another. More than likely, the reasoning for this is you haven't spent enough time with your world building, and in particular, you haven't spent enough time getting to know your characters. The next natural set of questions for you should be, how do you get to know your characters? How much should you world build? And what does world building even look like for a manga? Let me get started by first giving you the reason why this is also important. If you build your world and get to know your characters well enough, the story almost starts to write itself. Let me give you an example. So imagine that somebody is getting bullied on the street and they're being mugged and Batman walks by, right? That's going to be one scenario. But imagine the same person is getting mugged by the same mugger and the Joker walks by. There's two completely different stories that are being told in those circumstances. And why is that? Because we already have a preconceived idea in our head that Batman is going to stop crime, while the Joker enjoys that kind of stuff, right? He enjoys chaos. So it's a very lame example and it isn't very deeply thought out, but you can drop people in any form of circumstance like that and see what happens. For instance, Injustice, right? The video game series. Spoiler alert for this. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So it's kind of mostly created with the idea of how do we break Superman, and they decided breaking Superman would be having Lois Lane be killed, and in response Superman becomes a tyrant and everybody else is being kind of called on to save the world by defeating Superman. And there's people that join Superman's side and there's people that join like Batman's side, for instance. That is a very, some people might argue it's not the greatest story on the planet, but it's a very compelling story because now we get this person that most people see as very perfect, and we take the one thing that he cares most about in this world, which is the person that he loves, and we destroy that thing. And does that break him? And in this case, it does. So having an idea of all of your characters would allow you to create a story that's kind of like that, in which people are going to take sides. They have their own ideas, their own moral values and things like that, and it's going to create the story itself through the characters rather than you coming up with a situation and then trying to fit the characters into that situation. So let's talk about world building just a little bit more. So world building looks different for every medium, right? For an illustration, you need to just build the world enough to make the piece feel cohesive and allow the viewer enough information to connect emotionally with what they're looking at. For manga, however, you need to create an environment that can function without your main character walking through it. Things like the government, economy, ways to gather food, the hierarchy, the time period, social context, progressiveness of the people within your world, all those kinds of things need to be at least partially fleshed out before you can move towards creation. The other part of that is that not only do we have to write these things down, but as manga artists, we also should take the time to really illustrate all of this in a very bland way at first, but it needs to be illustrated in a way that makes sense to you and that makes sense if somebody else were to kind of look at it, just so they can get a general idea of what your world is about. So my recommendation would be that you start big, so you start more macro, and then you progressively get into the micro things. So what do I mean by that? You want to start with those bigger ideas that I just said, the government, the economy, How, like, where does it even take place? What's the land like? Things like that. And then you want to progressively go into, okay, so now we have the land picked out. What people live on this land? What groups of individuals are here? Are there people from outside of this world that are in, or outside of the land that it takes place at, coming in? Are there immigrants, for instance? Are there aliens, right? And then you want to take those particular races of individuals and you want to break them down more. Hopefully I haven't lost you yet, because we're getting to the really, really important part of all of this. Once you get all of that down, now you can get to the more micro part of it, which is the part that we care about the most, your characters. So how does your protagonist, for instance, fit? Is your protagonist a part of a group of people that were oppressed over a long period of time? Was your protagonist part of the group that was the oppressor and they're trying to break out of that? How does their family fit into those realms, right? Are they well off? Is the family not so well off? Are their parents still alive? There's so many questions that you can have, and if you start to fully flesh those things out for your character walks into situations and they already have, you already know what their personality and all that stuff is like. They're already going to have a response to those situations that kind of is just going to write itself, right? So that's really, really important. Another series of questions that you should definitely think about would be things like, which characters have magic and which ones don't? And do people in your world accept magic, if there is magic within your manga? Lots of mangas do have some form of a magic system though. So the next thing is, how do you know when you've done enough world building? Well, the answer to that is a little bit vague, but I would say when you stop having questions and start having answers that are already self-contained within your world. So if you can create a question and it can be resolved within the confines of your story without retconning or adding anything, then you've done a good enough job. This doesn't mean that you have to spend 10 years in your world building and never get to your actual characters, but it does mean that you should have more answers than questions. A good example of this is, what would happen if a character were to perform a spell or something in broad daylight in the middle of a very situated public place? If you're finding yourself trying to write a situation like that and you don't have any answers, then that is kind of a huge indication to you that, maybe you should have spent just a little more time with the world building so that those kinds of situations would have had answers. Even if you didn't ask that specific question while you were writing and doing your world building, once you have those kinds of questions, your world building should be done well enough for you to be able to really flesh that out within the rules and regulations and confines of the world. Because you could have a billion scenarios, right? Maybe some people have already seen magic and they're kind of okay with it. Maybe there's a group or a religious sect of people that worship those who perform magic, and they kind of flock around this person and start they go to their knees and start bowing down to them or something like that, right? Or maybe magic is illegal to do in a public space and it's only supposed to be done within the confines of specific areas, so the police come, or the magical police or whatever, right? There's so many rich scenarios that could happen with a circumstance like that, but if you don't fully flesh out your world building before you start writing these things, then it's going to be really difficult for it to have the impact that you might like. Now finally, how do you get to know your characters? Well, if you started big and then went into the small stuff like I suggested, your characters come down to personality traits, goals, and family history, and that's really about it, right? So if you have a character that's like Naruto, that's super ambitious and only has one goal, wants to become Hokage, then and you already have this fully fleshed out world, which the world was fully fleshed out, right? Now you put Naruto in a situation in which Does he perform magic in a public square in order to save someone, regardless of whether or not it's illegal? The answer to that question is yes, he does. And now you have these other scenarios that happen because of it, right? So Naruto performs some form of ninjutsu in order to save Sakura, for instance. And it's illegal in this particular place, which it wouldn't be in the world of Naruto, but it doesn't matter. Let's go with the example. So now does he save Sakura? Maybe he does. Let's say he does, but the circumstance is now that they're being tailed by a whole bunch of people that are trying to put them behind bars. You can kind of see how that just really flows with the particular world building that we've already done and just placing Naruto in a different scenario. So you can kind of just focus on creating things to make your character feel more consistent and real rather than all these other extra things that you could have just done in the world building process, right? And then you just continuously find really interesting scenarios to put these characters in. And that's really all the writing that you have to do, like I just did for Naruto, for instance. And it really makes your story flow together. And once you come up with a scenario, like I just did, if the world building is well structured enough, it creates a spin-off of different scenarios that'll push forward your manga. Now, what I don't want you to take from this, and this is really important for those of you who are able to stick around to the end, is I don't want you to take from this, if you do all the world building, then you don't really have to worry about the plot of your story. That's not the case. You should still have at least a general idea of what the end goal is of your plot. So for instance, again, Naruto's end goal is to become Hokage and save people, right? He wanted to save people. So we put Naruto in a world in which he wants to become Hokage, but we also put him in a scenario, or repeated scenarios, in which he has to either save people or find someone, right? And in this, he's running through all these different people who are also well fleshed out, because it's not only one character, you have to do this with all the characters. And he's running into organizations and like evil syndicates almost of individuals that are trying to stop him on his path, and he has to keep continuing to persevere over and over again. And that's almost simple to make, because you're creating scenarios in which people are in groups that's already been done in your world building, and now you're just coming up with the motivations for those groups. So I hope that was really helpful for you. It was something that was kind of eye-opening to me, because I would run into a lot of issues with my writing where I'd be like, oh man, I don't really know what happened here or what we should do. And it's because I just wasn't really fleshing out my characters. I didn't really know who they were. So please take this with you. Hopefully it was helpful. Give me a thumbs up if it was. And I'll continue to make some writing videos here and there and art videos to help you along the way. And yeah, I'm Manga Mike, and I'm out.